The Xbox Series X and S has been out for about a little over a month now, and one major question that's kind of coming up in some people's minds is, where are the exclusives? This is one of the big problems the Xbox One had up against the PS4, in that when you looked at the list of exclusive titles for it, PlayStation had a lot more stuff coming out. Not that there weren't good games on Xbox, just not nearly quite as many back to back to back. And so one of the big things building up towards the Xbox Series X and S was Microsoft really talking up, hey, we're getting all these new studios. We now have 14 first-party studios. That's not including the big Bethesda acquisition that happened right before the Series X launch. But none of those companies have yet to actually release any titles that are Xbox exclusives just quite yet. So I want to take a look at all the different devs currently beneath Microsoft and see what games they have announced coming out sometime in the future, and for the ones that don't have any games announced, what we could potentially see coming from them. To start with, let's talk about games that we know are actually coming out very soon, specifically those slated for sometime in 2021, which there's really only a couple of handful ones that have those confirmed dates. The first of which is, of course, Halo Infinite. This was supposed to be the big launch title for the Xbox Series X and S, but was pushed back after a lot of very mixed reaction to the gameplay demos that were shown off during an Xbox event over the summer, and the game is now slated for happening sometime in fall of 2021. This was definitely a bit of a momentum hit for Xbox at launch, because if there's any kind of major iconic character that's kind of considered a mascot for Microsoft, it's Master Chief. I mean, the guy's in Fortnite, of all things now, so yeah, definitely having a Halo game at launch would have been a good move, but if the game was not ready, probably a good thing they're actually giving it the time it needs, as certain recent examples like Cyberpunk have come to now show us. With its delay, though, Microsoft does really have not really any exclusives to point towards as far as their kind of opening quarter for the Series X goes. The only one that even comes close is the Medium, which also got pushed back repeatedly, now coming out in late January. So that at least addresses 343 Industries, which is, one of the big companies that has been under Microsoft for a little while now. What about some of the other dev teams, though? Now, part of the thing that's kind of weird right now is that of the 14 studios I mentioned earlier, not including Bethesda, 10 of them actually have games slated for some time in the future. It's just that a lot of them are TBA. We either have just minor hype trailers or just kind of small announcements about what they are. We don't actually have a ton of info just yet on when those titles will actually be releasing, but there are quite a few to go through. I want to start with Ninja Theory because they're actually in the interesting circumstance of being the only company on this list that actually has not one, but two games already announced in the works, albeit we don't actually know when they're coming out. The first of which is a sequel to Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice, which funnily enough was originally a PlayStation-timed exclusive. If you never tried the first one out, it's this really interesting and cool atmospheric action game that the combat in it was fine, but what really sold it was the way the storytelling was handled and the amount of just noise and sounds going on. It had this extremely immersive experience that was especially unique if played with headphones on. I highly recommend checking it out, and it looks as though we will be getting a sequel to that sometime in the future for Xbox. Now, alongside with this, something that was a bit more of just a kind of a light tease was the announcement of something called Project Mara. This is not necessarily a final game title for this game. We don't even really know any details about it other than the fact that it's one of the upcoming titles Ninja Theory is working on. The only thing that's kind of been given a little bit is that it is definitely aimed towards being a kind of psychological horror title. What is to me one of the most interesting games currently on the TBA list, though, is Obsidian's next upcoming RPG, Avowed. Now, we don't have a lot of great details on this one just yet, aside from one teaser trailer. The basic general idea that we're seeing, though, is that it's taking the universe that they created for their Pillars of Eternity pause and play top-down RPGs and adapting it for a first-person view, basically Elder Scrolls Skyrim-esque kind of style open-world RPG. Being a big fan of Obsidian and the Pillars games, this is honestly, actually, out of all the games I'm talking about today, the one that I'm the most curious about. Obviously, there's not a lot of great info to go off of just yet as far as how the final product is going to look, and we have no idea when this is slated for. Though based on how much little info we have, I'm leaning a little bit more towards 2022 and beyond, but we'll wait and see. Especially given the fact they did just release two games back-to-back with The Outer Worlds in 2019, also just recently getting an expansion pack for that, and of course Grounded this year. Speaking of companies with histories that got acquired by Microsoft, one of the slightly weirder situations right now is Double Fine, who does have a game coming out sometime in 2021, at least currently is the plan after a few pushbacks, which is, of course, the very long-awaited for Psychonauts 2. The only thing that's kind of weird about the situation is Psychonauts 2 is still a multi-platform game. It's still planned for PS4 along with Xbox One and getting enhancements for the Xbox Series X and Series S. So while this is going to be something coming from one of the studios Microsoft has acquired, it's not actually an exclusive for them. Although as far as I can tell, there hasn't been any confirmation of a PS5 update happening for the game. So maybe we'll see a situation where there's a sort of next-gen enhanced exclusive version for Xbox, while PlayStation still gets it on the PS4. Then, of course, there's Rare, who has a very large collection of some great first-party stuff that has been tapped into quite some time. But instead of getting any kind of sequels to any of those, at least not from Rare specifically, we'll talk about that in a second, they are, of course, working on a new title we've heard about for a little while now called Everwild. Now, despite the fact this game has been in development for some time and has been talked about for about the last 2 years, we haven't gotten a lot of hard information about the gameplay of it outside of one trailer. It's a little more than just a teaser one. It's not just like, here's the title and that's it, but it's not really giving us a good vibe of what the actual gameplay of Everwild's going to be, other than it being this very artistically beautiful adventure title that might be action-adventure? It's not entirely clear just yet. Now, one thing to keep in mind with some of these dev studios under Microsoft is that some of them are very laser focused on working on a particular franchise or type of game. And so some of them aren't exactly surprising in what their next titles are, or if we don't know what the next titles are, you can take a pretty healthy guess what it's going to be. In particular, there's of course Undead Labs, who is responsible for the first 2 State of Decay games and is working on State of Decay 3, which again, we did get a little trailer for, but not a ton of in-depth gameplay just yet. And World's Edge, a new dev team that was announced during the major Xbox event last year that their kind of stated main purpose is to work on the Age of Empire games, which we know Relic Games is releasing a new Age of Empires 4 sometime in 2021, so that is another one that's kind of spoken for, although we don't know the full details yet of all their involvement in that and what other titles, including things like HD remakes, they may be involved in. Now, a lot of the games we've talked about so far, aside from Halo Infinite, are not necessarily games that I would consider console movers. They are a lot of games that are probably going to still be really good. They have their fan bases that they appeal to, but they're not necessarily the big games that draw a lot of attention or normally identified as being sort of synonymous with the company, at least not just yet. However, there are a number of games that are currently announced, albeit again with skim details here and there, that are looking to be some of the bigger titles to keep your eyes open for. An obvious one being Turn 10 Studios, who's responsible for the last 7 Forza Motorsport games, is, guess what? Working on... What happened? One unsurprising one, for instance, is Turn 10 Studios, who's responsible for the last 7 Forza Motorsport games, so you might be surprised to find out their next game is Forza Motorsport. They're actually dropping the 8. It's kind of being treated as a reboot of the series a little bit. There's been that kind of talk of getting back to basics and re-examining what exactly makes it a Forza game, and so it might be something a little bit different from what we've seen the last couple entries, but we know there is a new Forza Motorsport on its way, which I cannot wait to have come out because that means I can start waiting on the next Forza Horizon. Maybe. That's kind of a weird situation right now. The reason why this is a weird situation right now is because Playground Games, the company that normally makes the Forza Horizon titles, is actually currently working on the newest Fable game. Fable, of course, is one of the older exclusives that Microsoft used to have to lean on back in the original Xbox and 360 days. It has not had a new proper entry since near the end of the 360 life cycle with a Kinect title, which doesn't really fully count either. But the point is, it's finally being brought back by Playground Games for, again, sometime in the future. Like with a lot of these other situations, we just really have a cool trailer announcing that it's happening. Not a lot of details just quite yet in terms of how faithful it's going to be to the original series and how much it's going to change things in favor of being, a new title after this long. And then we have the most recently announced game on this list, a new Perfect Dark game that has yet to actually have a full proper title coming from the initiative. And this is really interesting for a couple of different reasons. First off, the fact that it is a new Perfect Dark game not coming from Rare. This is one of the numerous franchises that were kind of underneath that umbrella of here's cool games Rare used to make that they haven't done in a while and we would love to see come back. And it is coming back, just not from them, but instead from one of Microsoft's newer teams, the Initiative. Now, the thing about the Initiative is that this is going to be the first game made by them and the main kind of pitch for this dev team when Microsoft announced their formation is that it was going to be their quadruple A game studio. The concept being that as far as kind of first party, super high level, high polished games go, the initiative is going to be that company that Microsoft is using from here on out. And so when you hear this, where it's this brand new dev team using a lot of talent from other companies, it's a little surprising to see the first thing they're doing is reviving a previous franchise from another company. This isn't something that I'm necessarily opposed to, but it does raise an interesting question of if Microsoft is willing to kind of rearrange properties this way, bringing something that was a rare title over to a new dev team, how likely is that to happen with other previous franchises? This is relevant because I've actually now run out of games to talk about that are actually confirmed and happening sometime in the future. So that covers 10 of the different dev studios that Microsoft currently has underneath them. There are 4 others, which, to be fair, some of them, it's not really a surprise why we don't have a new game announcement yet, because they just released something, or because it is, again, one of those dev teams that's very laser focused on a particular property. Mojang, for instance, just released Minecraft Dungeons and is constantly working on Minecraft updates. That is what they do. Those are the games that we can expect to see come from them. The same applies to the Coalition, who is mostly dedicated towards Gears of War titles. Gears of War 5 came out last year. It is actively still receiving major updates. We just had a major one added on just recently, and so it's not really a surprise that we don't have any hard announcement for what their next game is, although, truth be told, it's more than likely going to be Gears 6. Based on the kind of yearly gap we saw in the past where Gears 4 happened and then Gears 5 is 3 years later, we might see a Gears 6 happen in 2022, but considering the fact that a lot of games have suffered delays and pushbacks due to what a particular year 2020 has been, I would not be shocked if that ends up being something a little further in the future like 2023, but we'll find out. That leaves us with 2 studios that don't have any new games accounted for right now, and these are probably the 2 biggest studios that are kind of wild cards in terms of what they could make, which are inXile and Compulsion. Now, of the 2, inXile does have a longer history with more games underneath their belt, and so you can kind of get a little better sense of what they traditionally work on and what might be kind of given to them in the future. They did just have a recent release earlier this year with Wasteland 3, which is part of the reason why we don't have any kind of expected new titles just yet from them, but if they are going to be working on any kind of Xbox exclusive type stuff, it stands to reason that more than likely it might be some kind of RPG title. There's a small part of me that kind of hopes they try to revive Hunted, which was this really not good Xbox 360 PS3 game that was a co-op shooter. Basically imagine Gears of War, but fantasy. It wasn't great, but it had its moments, and I think with the right polish, and now actually being officially a Microsoft Xbox game, I'd be kind of curious to see them take another stab at it. No, don't follow me. No! Since you can see this code. Twisting it's almost more dangerous. Oh no. Meanwhile, with Compulsion, there's really not as much history to work with here. They've released a total of 2 titles, Contrast back in 2013, and then We Happy Few back in 2016. Given the fact they don't really have any games that are established as franchises as far as having multiple entries go, this might be a company where whatever they release next for Microsoft is either going to be something that is entirely brand new, they could make a continuation of one of the titles they currently have, like We Happy Few, or, real wildcard moment, maybe like with the Initiative, they could be put in charge of reviving or bringing back some other franchise, much like how Playground is working on Fable and Initiative is working on Perfect Dark. Now again, so far we've been focusing on the 14 studios that were acquired before the whole big Bethesda acquisition situation thing, which is a whole nother pile of insanity because Bethesda is not one singular company, but a lot of different dev teams, many of which still have games already in development being planned for multi-platform release, like Deathloop, which is being pushed heavily on PlayStation 5, despite the fact that very soon Bethesda is going to be an Xbox company. Now, technically, this merger has not happened yet, so whenever being asked about what's going to happen with a lot of these titles, the answer that's been given has sort of been like, we'll talk about it once it actually happens. It sounds as though some games are going to stay as multi-platform titles, but Microsoft still has very much the power to be like, you know what, this game and this game, we're going to make these first party, which is a very interesting possibility in the future. Bethesda has established a lot of different franchises. Again, this is a company that was large enough as a third-party developer to have their own E3 press conference, so there's no shortage of games that Microsoft could surprisingly turn into future Xbox exclusives, whether that's bringing back Dishonored, future Doom titles. Obviously, Elder Scrolls, Fallout, and Starfield are all kind of a very big question mark right now because all of those were really heavy hitters for the first-party Bethesda-style games, and now we don't know whether or not those might come to platforms outside of PC and Xbox. Like I said at the top of this video, as things stand right now, the Xbox Series X and Series S are a little light when it comes to exclusives, but based on the stuff that's actually already been announced, albeit, again, not as many details as I would like to have for some of them, there's actually quite a list of stuff that's planned for the future. And especially with the kind of big question mark that is Bethesda, there could be a lot of really big appealing things announced later on. But as things stand right now, Microsoft is definitely leaning a lot more on Game Pass and the general power level of the Series X as being its larger selling points. Anyways, what I'm trying to get at here is that as of right now, just like with Xbox One versus PS4, exclusives are definitely very light on the Xbox Series X. But I am very, very curious to see what this landscape is going to look like 2 years from now. Unless a lot of these titles are still in limbo and get pushed back further. Look, the point is, by the end of the Series X's lifecycle, I'm really curious to see what the list of exclusives are for the PS5 and Series X.